Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce Annual Legislative Preview Luncheon presented by Indiana University. I am Christopher Emge, Director of Advocacy and Public Policy. On behalf of the Chamber and staff, I would like to thank you for joining us today. As we begin, I will ask all those that are able to rise with me and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. My apologies, I'm a little raspy here. But before we get started, I want to extend the Chamber's deep appreciation for Indiana University for their extraordinary leadership as the presenting sponsor for today's luncheon. Please join me in giving the IU team one more round of applause for their partnership for the Chamber of Commerce. We have several Indiana University representatives joining us today. And at this time, I'd like to invite IU's Director of State Relations, Mr. Zach Howard-Smith, to the podium to share his remarks.
Thank you, Chris. I'll keep it short. Zach Smith-Howard, Director of State Relations for Indiana University. Some of our team is here on behalf of Indiana University, President Pamela Witten, our Vice President for University Relations, Michael Huber. We are thrilled to be a part of this event. I myself serve on the Chamber Advocacy Group with Chris, the legislative group, and we have Val Pena and Rachel McAfee and other folks on our team who are deeply involved with the Chamber's work and other pieces here in Bloomington, but we can't do this. It's a partnership, and we'll have some difficult issues ahead. We've got great relationships with our local legislators. Grateful to hear from those folks today. And again, just happy to be here and grateful to sponsor on behalf of Indiana University. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And thanks again to Indiana University's team for their dedicated partnership with the Chamber and the entire community. I want to recognize and thank our very important partners and sponsors for today's event. Without it, we could not make this possible. The following Chamber members are IU Credit Union, Old National Bank, the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation, Duke Energy, Fourth Phase Technology, Hoosier Energy, and Smithville. Now, this wouldn't be a Chamber event without some shameless plugs, and we do have some upcoming events that I'd like to highlight before we get started. Our next event is Business After Hours on Thursday, January 16th. That is at Orange Theory Fitness on Kirkwood, 5:30 to 7:30. And if you've not seen Eric's Chamber moment on YouTube, he features Orange Theory in that, and it's a quite entertaining video. Young Professionals Bloomington's first event of 2025 is Resolution Win Trivia. This is designed to boost career and personal development. This interactive event is a perfect way to start the year with a purpose. This will be on Thursday, January 23rd from 5:30 to 7 o'clock at the Southwest Library. And if you've not been to the Southwest Library, this is a good excuse as any to go there. Lastly, our ever-popular Bloomington Women in Leadership Group will feature Francis Mateo with Bloomington Seal Coatings, Tiffany Oren with Bluestone Tree, and newly minted County Commissioner Jody Madeira, who will share their stories of unexpected leadership on how to thrive Tuesday, February 11th from 11 to 1 p.m. at Ivy Tech Shreve Hall. Be sure to sign up for that when those seats do go fast. And to register for all of these events and much more, go to chamberbloomington.org. You know, as the voice of business, the Chamber is dedicated to advocating for the best interests of our members and the community. We strive to connect our members with decision makers on the important policy issues that impact our prosperity and the communities. Today's legislative preview event is one way we facilitate those meaningful connections between membership and lawmakers serving in the General Assembly. The format today will be familiar with many of you. It will consist of introducing our legislators, hearing from each of them about their priorities for the session with an audience question and answer, moderated by our own Chamber President, Eric Spoonmore. We are honored to have our three legislators here today to share their thoughts on the 2025 legislative session. Representative Dave Hall, Representative Peggy Mayfield, and Representative Matt Pierce. Senators Eric Cook and Shelley Yoder, along with Representative Bob Heaton, are listed in the program, but they send their regrets and are unable to attend today due to prior engagements. To our legislators, welcome, and thank you for being here today. We do appreciate that. Right now, I'd like to hand over things to our moderator, Mr. Eric Spoonmore.
Thank you, Christopher, and thanks everyone for being here today, especially all of our sponsoring members who contribute the critical resources to make these important community events possible. Thanks also to our lawmakers who've taken time to join us today to inform the community on the 2025 legislative session. This is always one of my favorite chamber events, and it's really a great way for the business community to kick off the new year. This year, the legislature will be formulating the next biennial budget for the state of Indiana, as our newest governor, Mike Braun, is preparing to take office on Monday of next week. And all signs are really pointing to an eventful session this year as the Republicans look to address property tax reform, lowering health care costs, and containing Medicaid costs, among many other fiscal priorities. I'm sure we'll again see much spirited debate in the legislature and the tight deadlines that are always happening before the session closes on April 29th this year. And as we know, the legislature can have a significant impact on Hoosier businesses and families, especially during a budget session. So I know we're all very excited to hear from our lawmakers today on what's in store for 2025. So before I introduce our lawmakers, I want to take a moment to quickly recognize some special guests who are joining us today. I know I'm going to miss some people, so I apologize in advance. We have a lot of folks here. The Chamber of Commerce has 17 members that serve on our board of directors who provide great vision and leadership to the organization and the community. Joining us here today from our board of directors is Rachel McAfee, Executive Director of Community Relations with Indiana University. Dan Peterson, Vice President, Government and Industry Relations with Cook Group, and Scott Shishman, our board chair, who is Market President with Old National Bank. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to our board members. We also have several local elected leaders joining us here. City Council Member Isak Asare and City Council Member Sidney Zulik, Monroe County Council President Trent Deckard, Town of Ellettsville Clerk Noel Conyer. Michael Grimm is here representing U.S. Representative Aaron Houchin's office. Van Buren Trustee Rita Barrow is joining us. And finally, some other notable local officials are in attendance, including Monroe County Community School Corporation Superintendent Dr. Mark A. Winston, Bloomington Transit General Manager John Connell, and City Controller Jessica McClellan. Thanks to all of the officials who are here joining us today. Let's give them all another big round of applause. We appreciate you all for your service to the community. Okay, so our legislators want to hear your questions and the issues that matter most to you and your organizations. If you have questions for our legislators, please write them on your question cards that are on your table and raise your hand. A chamber staff member will collect your question. If there's a specific legislator you'd like to address your question to, just indicate that on the line provided on the card. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. And so at this time, I'd like to ask our legislators to come join us at the dais. And we will give them just a couple of minutes each to share their insights on the 2025 session and what they believe are going to be the top priorities that'll be addressed in the State House this year. And I think we'll start with Representative Mayfield. How about that? So, Representative Mayfield is a Republican serving Indiana House District 60, which covers portions of Johnson, Morgan, and Monroe counties. Representative Mayfield was first elected to District 60 in 2012. She's vice chair of the House Public Policy Committee and serves on the House Insurance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. She is also appointed to serve on the Indiana Commission for Women and the Indiana Commission for Hispanic and Latino Affairs. Welcome, Representative Mayfield.
Thank you, Eric. And I apologize. I am going to talk as little as possible because it prompts a coughing fit if I'm talking too much. So, our priorities clearly are our budget and how we are going to allocate the funds that the state anticipates, which is going to be very tight. Our revenues are pretty much matching our expenditures right now, which is the way it should be, but that doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room. And we have some, if you want to call it uncontrollable or unforeseen costs of our Medicare, or Medicaid, and how we can control that, or how we can, the growth of that is like 17% over the next biennium, and that is just unsustainable with our state budget. So we're looking at what we have to do there and still provide services to that population. The next thing, we'll be still working on housing, what can be done. Obviously, the state is not a mortgage holder. We don't do housing. We're not a landlord. But what do we have within our toolbox to help people either maintain the homes they have or moving up, or those first-time buyers? What can we do to facilitate home ownership in our state? Excuse me. I've been coughing on you for 2 days. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to think. I'm a little bit distracted. So we have the budget, Medicaid, healthcare cost and transparency is another one, just for everybody else, is what are we going to do? What kind of regulation are we going to impose on PBMs? And the transparency there, that has been going on in several states around the nation. And we're looking at what we can do. And of course, Indiana is a high ERISA plan state. Nationwide, it's about 60%. Indiana, it's closer to 80%. So even when we talk about all the wonderful things we're doing about transparency and cost controls, it's only affecting about 20% of the plans out there, because the rest of them are ERISA self-insured plans, and federal law says we can't touch those. So we can do we can make a lot of laws, a lot of policy, but it affects a minority of health plans. My own bills that I'll be pursuing is, one that especially affects this area, is a modification to the Monroe County food and beverage tax. As Ellettsville has continued to grow over the last 15 years, and the transit issues that have arisen between Bloomington and Ellettsville, and how maybe we can use some of that food and beverage tax to address that particular problem. I'm getting a lot of support. Some of it's only 50%, some of it's 80%, some are fully on board, so that is a bill that I have filed. The version filed is not going to be, I know is not going to be what's going to pass. I'm still working on getting input from those stakeholders to tweak it to the point where I can get 80% or more support on using some of that food and beverage tax for a dedicated transit program. And I'm trying to think of, the rest of my bills are kind of a smattering. I do aviation work. I do, I'm doing one on the title deed fraud I mentioned last year. That's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. As a matter of fact, NCOIL, which is the National Council of Insurance Legislators, they're going to take my bill and they're going to watch it and possibly use that as model legislation across the country. So I'm going to stop talking and let these other guys have some input.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Mayfield. Next, we'll have Representative Matt Pierce, Democrat serving Indiana House District 61, which covers part of Monroe County, including a large portion of the city of Bloomington. Representative Pierce has held the District 61 seat since 2002, and before that he served on the Bloomington City Council from 1995 to 2002. He's an assistant Democratic floor leader and the ranking minority member of the Indiana House Utilities, Energy, and Telecommunications Committee. He also serves on the following committees: Courts and Criminal Code, Elections, Appointment, Rules, and Legislative Procedures, and the Statutory Committee on Ethics. Welcome, Representative Pierce.
Thank you very much. It's hard to figure out what to talk about in 2 minutes because there's so much stuff going on. But one of the things that is happening in the House is the speakers decided to try a little bit of a different schedule where we're not in session each day of the week, but the committees are meeting. And I think his hope is that more committee work will get done earlier, and that will kind of make the first couple weeks more productive. In the long session, it's often kind of a slow ramp up to get the bills introduced, assigned, and out there. And so I don't know if it's going to work, but you should just be aware of that. You may have more committee meetings earlier and less situations where you have all of the members in the House sitting at the same time during session. So we'll have to see how that works. Well, I'm hoping that this session will stay really focused on how we help the working families in our state that are struggling. We saw in the last election, I think the message was pretty clear that people feel that costs are too high, kind of the American dream kinds of things like, can I afford a home? Can I send my kids to college? Those kinds of things I think are top of the mind of our constituents. And so I'm hoping that the legislature will be able to really focus in on the practical things that can be done to help those families meet those challenges. It's really easy for the legislature to get kind of sidetracked on kind of what I call the crazy issues, the culture wars kind of thing. And I was a little disheartened when within the first 2 days of session we had this little group pop up that said they wanted to fund IU because they think they're not following the law about how the Kinsey Institute gets funded. I'm hoping that's just a small outlier group, but you never know. Sometimes things pick up a momentum. I would have never thought that the original provision that said no tax dollars could go to Kinsey would have actually ended up in the final version of the budget, but it did. So you just never know. They claim that more supporters will be coming, so we'll just have to see what happens with that issue. Another issue which to me is kind of out on the fringe, and maybe not so much other people, but this proposal to basically dissolve school districts that have more than half the students going to charter schools or using vouchers to go to private schools. The proposal is to get rid of the school district, and it would affect places like the IPS system up in Indianapolis, and each individual school would essentially become something like a charter school with its own school board appointed by some outside entity. And that just doesn't seem like very good policy for a lot of reasons. And we'll have to see where that goes. It's unclear to me whether that is just the idea of the author of the bill or whether that's something that he was asked to introduce on behalf of leadership. It's just unclear to me whether or not that's something that's likely to move or not. But to me, that's a fairly kind of radical idea, in my opinion. So on the budget, because I know I'm probably used up my time already, but let me just say that on the budget, my biggest concern is, the big ticket items are health care through the Medicaid program and education. And we're going to have to work really hard. We don't get to print money like the federal government, so we have to work really hard to make what we have be most impactful. And that means we have to make smart decisions with that money. My concern is usually when we get into tight budgets like this, the people who end up taking the hit are the people at the lowest socioeconomic levels, the people who rely upon those state programs for their health care. And so I'm hoping that our budget writers will keep that in mind and try to find a way not to have the least in our communities take the biggest hit when it comes to the budget. And that's kind of a major concern of mine. And just, one example of how that could play out. So it sounds like the leadership is going to make sure that the private school voucher program, where you take tax dollars and give it to parents to pay for private education, that the last 5% of the wealthiest Hoosiers who are not in that voucher program, not eligible for it, they will become eligible. So basically, it's 100% universal vouchers. The thing that I find concerning about that is those wealthy families, if they have chosen to send their children to a private school, they're probably already paying for it because they have the means. So if we decide to subsidize those wealthy families, every dollar that we send to them to subsidize their kids' private school education is one less dollar that could go to traditional public schools, perhaps go to child care. We have really a big problem with child care, big need in our state that's not getting met, and that's an expensive ticket. But, it's a matter of priorities. So I would prefer that we take the money that we have and try to focus it down to these things like early childhood education and health care and the programs that really help a lot of our constituents. And I guess I'll stop there because I'm going on too long.
Well, thank you, Representative Pierce. And we are ahead of schedule here, so we can be a little bit flexible on time. And finally, Representative Dave Hall, a Republican serving Indiana House District 62, which includes all of Brown County, portions of Monroe and Jackson counties. Representative Hall was first elected to the Indiana House District 62 seat in 2022. He will serve as Assistant Majority Whip, Vice Chair of the Utilities, Energy, and Telecommunications Committee, and is a member of the Local Government Committee and Natural Resources Committee. Welcome, Representative Hall.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you, guys. I need to point out an obvious thing here on the stage. This is the first time that I've ever been in Bloomington where the Republicans have outnumbered the Democrats in the front of the room. So I don't know that this will ever happen again. So we're
making history.
Yeah. So I won in 2022, and these guys have covered a lot of the issues that are coming up, and I've got a little bit to add, but not a lot, so I'm going to fill my time with some nonsense here. In 2022, I was not expected to win this district. I live in Jackson County. That makes up 4% of the population of this district. 71% is Monroe County, and 25% is Brown County. So my friends in Jackson County told me, they said, you know how you won that district, right? And I said, no, what do you think? And they said, well, 96% of the people didn't know who you were. So the fact that I won this re-election they've not said a word to me since then, by the way, but proves them wrong. And I appreciate you guys putting me back here again. I mean, it's been an honor to do this. I've learned so much. This 2-year election cycle is very taxing, especially in a district that's pretty well split right down the middle. So it causes me it forces me to get out and work, and I enjoy it, and I've gotten to learn things that I wouldn't have known otherwise if I were in a safer district where I didn't have to worry about campaigning up to the general election. And so for me, November really starts my hard state house work where I'm trying to get bills finalized and drafted and find what's going to actually move in the state house. And I've got 3 bills I think this year that have a chance of progressing out of the House. One is Representative Pierce and I have worked on the last 3 years some variation of a form of a gate fee or some payment in lieu of taxes from the state for counties that have a high concentration of state-owned land. And Brown County and Monroe County just happen to be 2 of those counties that are 2 of the highest, most highly concentrated state-owned properties. So this year, I think our bill may actually move out of the House. It's going to get a hearing in Natural Resources, I'm told. But it would allow a county to implement a gate fee of up to $1. So for Monroe County, that would be like Paintown and Fairfax. For each car that comes through that location, the DNR would collect that $1 fee. It would allow the counties to spend it on any need to do with public safety or infrastructure, including water quality improvements. So counties that have lakes like Patoka Lake, Brookville Lake, Lake Monroe, they can use that gate fee money for any purpose, but like shoreline stabilization or some, Friends of Lake Monroe for planting like shade trees on feeder creeks or however they want to use it. But in Brown County, they've got a different need. The amount of ground that they have there causes a strain on the local public safety infrastructure that they have, because they've got 15,000 people. When you take state park, federal land, church camps, classified forest, much of their county it has no assessed value, and it's not collecting any money for the county. And then there's not a lot of industry there, so everything they support for our state park there and visitors coming in is on the backs of those property taxpayers that do pay property tax and their income tax. So it would generate about $100,000 for Brown County to spend on their public safety needs, and I think it was around $60,000 for Lake Monroe that the county council could put it in public safety if they wanted to. But that was I met with Cheryl Munson, and we had some great talks. We didn't always agree on everything, but she was always great, and she treated me really well. And when I was talking about this bill, she's the one that mentioned that need in Monroe County wouldn't necessarily be public safety. So can we open this up to other uses? And being on the county council, I didn't want to, paint people into a corner where they had to use it in a certain, one situation. But that I think that's got a chance of moving. I've got another bill that would some of these animal testing facilities, they test on non-rodent animals, and usually it's beagles, I'm told. And at the end of a trial, those dogs there's no clear path on what happens to those dogs. They don't have to put them up for adoption. They can just be euthanized. So my other bill would be a shall provision that if there's a USDA veterinarian in those facilities, and if they deem that dog is healthy enough and has the temperament to be adopted, then they have to put those dogs up for adoption. So I think that one may move. I've got some good co-authors on it as well. And then I've got an annexation bill. So I won't get into all the details on that, but if you guys want to ask questions about that, I can answer those later. Not everyone in here may love it, but there was a few things that we haven't had our agenda bills drop yet. So I was in the Farm Bureau luncheon, and that was where I found out like bits and pieces of what our agenda bills are going to be. So I tried to get more information, and there was just none. So we've got the House Bill 1005 was an infrastructure bill that we had that would, it created a revolving loan fund, and we put $75 million into that. I think that was in 23, and that $75 million is gone now. So I think we've got another infrastructure bill that will kind of build off of that same concept to help when you have, before you even build the house, put the foundation in, there's so much cost in sewer and water and roads and curbs and sidewalks, and so that's hard to get money loaned on that project. So if we can help complete that, it makes it easier for these developers to secure loans on the project itself. So I think that's going to have more funding put into it, and then maybe expand in other ways, but I still haven't seen all of that bill yet. But I'm a co-author on that bill, because I was a co-author before, so I'm excited to be a co-author. I can't wait to see the bill. Healthcare transparency, we're going to continue to expand on that and trying to, keep prices down. We're not probably in a situation where we're going to set prices, but if there's, the transparency helps a lot for people to be able to choose what provider, if you can get on, I think, so there's a dashboard you can get on, you can put in your service, you can put in your zip code, and it'll tell you what that service costs in those surrounding hospital areas, and I think that's going to help people, but we just need to expand on that as well. And then school deregulation. That's about all I've got on school deregulation, but it's going to, like, schools are, they obviously want more money, but they also want to spend less time with all the regulations that they have to follow, so we're going to try and figure out how to lessen that burden on schools as well. Thank you.
Great. Terrific. Thank you, Representative Hall, and thanks to each of you for being here to share some insights on the 2025 session. Now, we want to hear questions from the audience, so just a reminder, use your cards to write down questions, raise your hand. Josh here will come pick those up, and I will read them for our legislators. As you all are doing that, I'm going to get us started with one I'm kind of curious about. Well, maybe somebody will ask about Representative Hall's annexation bill. I'm sure that would be well received here with this group. But I am going to start with one about tax reform. So many Hoosiers, as Mr. Pierce mentioned, I think we probably all agree, are struggling with higher property tax bills, over the last few years, higher costs in general. The Tax Reform Task Force recently recommended property tax relief for seniors, businesses, and working families. How can the state strike a balance between property tax relief for Hoosiers and the ability of our local governments to generate revenue to provide essential services? And whoever would like to start, Mr. Hall.
Yeah, I'll start. So it's, you know, I knocked on a lot of doors, and it came up some, but it was not as frequent as I would have expected, the property tax issues. And when I would knock in Brown County, and there's a lot of people that move into Brown County that did not move from in the state, and when they come to Indiana, they are tickled to death with our property taxes. But that does not go well when you tell the next person who's complaining that their property taxes have doubled in the last 3 years. That's not a good explanation for them. So don't use that if you're going door to door. But it's going to be a tough. I was on the county council for over 5 years, almost 6 years, and the state does not collect any money from property taxes. It goes to your schools, your local government, your townships, your advisory boards, your libraries. So anything that is relief for taxpayers, the state is not in a position to backfill that cut. So it's going to be, you know, that burden is going to be shouldered by the local units of government. They have to make up for that. So I had a bill 2 years ago that did not move, and I talked to Chairman Thompson, and he said, we'll hear it next year. And he didn't hear it the next year, so I've talked to him again, and he liked it, but it had to do with Bloomington. That's what prompted this for me. I was knocking on doors, and this is not, you know, calling anybody out for anything, but the Bloomington City Council had increased the local income tax by over 50%. And people that did not live in Bloomington were upset that the Bloomington City Council had enough weighted votes on the local income tax council to raise their their income tax by over half, or by 50%. So my bill would just have eliminated the local income tax council and put that burden on the county council, where every person in the county votes for a majority of the members on the county council, so they could hold that group accountable for raising that tax. To the benefit of the county and Ellettsville and some of these others, Bloomington City Council they were the ones that took all the heat for increasing the local income tax, and it benefited. The budget grew in these other areas. So I would like to see those, if Ellettsville could raise their tax when they deem it necessary, Monroe County could raise their tax if they see that necessary, where they're accountable to the people that they're raising the tax on. And on the property tax issue, I don't know exactly how that's going to shake out, but it would be nice if rather than have this growth quotient that just says, okay, your AV has exceeded the growth quotient, your rate doesn't need to go up, so you're going to collect this much more money. If a county doesn't exceed that, the AV in that county doesn't grow faster than the growth quotient, then the rates tick up to make up for that, so they can collect that money. If a county or Ellettsville or whoever says, we're not going to collect that extra rate, we're just going to leave that, well, it doesn't go back to taxpayers. It just gets gobbled up by another entity in that unit. So if the county says, hey, we're not going to take that rate, that should be a direct reflection on the taxpayer, that they pay less of a county tax, rather than have this umbrella of everybody, with their hands on that tax money. So I would like to see that. I would like to see more, if they cut your taxes, you see a cut on your tax payment. If they raise it, you see the raise. And I think that would be a benefit to people, and would make their elected officials more accountable to them. It's easier to explain, because the growth quotient is not a popular thing to talk about at doors when people are complaining about taxes, because it's confusing, and if you don't understand it, it's just hard to follow. So that's my non-answer to how we're going to fix the property tax issue.
Because there are a dozen legislators who all have a great idea on how to fix this. Governor Braun's budget, I understand, is going to be released next Thursday in the afternoon. So we won't know what his plan is. But his bill is basically what he campaigned on. That's exactly what he's going to come back with the property taxes, about freezing the cap on how much it can increase, between 2% and 3%, whether it rolls back to like a 2021 rate. That might be problematic, because a lot of that money has been committed, bonded against, but maybe they'll figure that out. J.D. Prescott has a very intriguing proposal about eliminating the property tax and instead doing a sales tax on services with exemptions for what already exists. Education, medical, a few other areas that you don't pay taxes on. But that way you will never be tied to an assessed value, which is, I won't say monopoly money, but it's never a realized gain. So you're against this index that you really don't have control over. But as a long-term policy, what you have to think about is, as Representative Hall alluded to, if you have a rate and the rate goes up, you would expect to pay more. If your rate goes down, you would expect to pay less. But that's not what happens, because the rate is tied to the assessed value as a factor, and the whole levy gets redistributed, so if your rate goes down, someone else is going to pick it up. But is it the right public policy to say, if the rate goes up or down, so should your property taxes, if we're going to keep a property tax system? So Representative Thompson has a bill that basically over the next several years would do that. So ultimately, in a step-by-step fashion, your property tax would be sort of calculated like your income tax. Amount times rate is the amount you pay. Very predictable, very, I don't want to say sustainable, but you can anticipate what you're going to pay year to year. So those are two very interesting ideas to look at. Even if we keep the property tax system, is assessed value the right thing to tie it to? That's the one thing that fluctuates wildly. So, and we would have to keep tweaking it every 5-10 years to keep it under control. So we'll always be coming back to try and find a new solution. But that's the policy of rates going up or down reflected in your property tax, whether we eliminate the property tax and just go with sales tax on services, or where are we going to land in between?
Yeah, I agree. Telling someone like, well, you could live in New Jersey, so feel good about your property taxes, that doesn't play too well. But it is kind of true if you look at other states. So the legislature has been dealing with complaints about property taxes going on like forever. When I was clerk of the House, we had a remodeling project, and we actually found like a letter stuck in the wall. We couldn't figure out how it got in it from like 1945, and it was a farmer complaining about his property taxes. So it's like, it's gone on forever. But the interesting thing to me is, a lot of the major property tax reforms attempts to reduce taxes or limit their growth goes back to Governor Bowen, the early 1970s. And from the Bowen administration, early 70s, up through really the early 2000s, the legislature had an understanding that if they were going to limit property taxes in a way that reduced revenue to local units of government, they had an obligation to provide another, replacement for that. So we would have these property tax replacement credits, and the last big round was when the sales tax got raised, and the theory was that would replace the revenue that was being removed by redoing the property taxes. And in recent years, I think that attitude has changed, that the legislature is more likely to just reduce the taxes, cap the taxes, limit them in some way, which would be popular with homeowners who may not have the income to pay those higher taxes. In an income tax world, theoretically, it's tied somehow to your ability to pay. But with property taxes, the big problem is, particularly if you're a senior citizen, you may have lived in your home for 30 or 40 years. You managed to get it paid off. You're on a fixed income now, and these things go up, and it's really distressing. So I get that, and it would be good to do something to alleviate that, because it can take a big chunk out of someone who's just relying upon Social Security to get by. But I think what you're likely to see coming up in this session is just a sense that, well, the local units of government are probably a little bloated anyway. They need a little lesson in tightening their belts. So we're just going to reduce these taxes, and they're just going to have to figure out how to make do. And maybe that'll be a good exercise for them to go through. And so I guess you like that, depending upon what you think if you think your local government is doing a good job with your money and is struggling to make things happen with limited revenue, maybe you're not excited about that. If you kind of think they're bloated and have too many programs, that's good. So we'll have to see how that how that pans out. But I think that's probably where it's going to land, is really not a concern about replacing the revenue that's lost, and it's just going to be the locals have to figure out how to get through it.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I'm going to move on now to another topic. Healthcare, Medicaid. I'm going to combine two questions that we've received here. So first, once we pay for education and healthcare, Medicaid, how much money is left for everything else in the budget? And then what are the ideas on how to make Medicaid fit into the budget so that it works for Hoosiers?
Okay. Right now, we spend, it's roughly 49% on education. And there is no formula for how much is dedicated to education or whatever. So it varies from cycle to cycle. We've gone 51%, we've down to 48%. Roughly half of our budget is for education. About, I want to say 15% was Medicaid. But as I mentioned, we're looking at a 7% one year, almost 10%, a 17% increase over the biennium on that 18%. If Medicaid keeps growing at the rate we've experienced in the last 4 years, it will overtake our spending on education in like a decade. And that's why we have to try and stem what we're approving in Medicaid. I know it's a pass-through, so we may have to be a little bit more selective on the services that are covered for the Medicaid population.
Yeah, let me just say that the legislature, we spend a lot of time trying to deal with rising healthcare costs, and it's kind of like treating the symptoms. We'll do something here, something there. We'll try to get a little more competition going, more transparency. Maybe consumers will make different decisions, and the market could maybe work in that situation. But we've had such a crazy healthcare system develop. We've got all these middlemen. We've got pharmacy benefit managers. We've got insurance companies. And the question is, what's the value added for all these people in the chain between us and the provider? And so I think at the end of the day, we might find some way to treat the symptoms, and I suspect that's probably going to just be kind of rationing the care, and some people on the bottom are not going to get what they got before, and they're just going to kind of be on their own. I think that's probably the reality of what's going to happen. But what needs to happen, whether it's in the legislature or maybe Congress is in a better position to do it, we're back to the age-old battle, which are always big slugfests, is like, how do you reform the American healthcare system? You look at all the countries in the world, they don't have this kind of system. And they have better they don't spend nearly as much on healthcare, and they actually have better outcomes. People live longer, they're healthier. And there are all kinds of, white papers and academics who write about why this is and what you might do to change it. And it's very difficult because the minute you talk about making some very significant changes to the healthcare system that might make it more efficient and have better outcomes, people get scared. Because even though they don't particularly like the system they're in now, at least they kind of know it. And for those of us who are fortunate to work for large employers who provide pretty good health insurance, we're kind of like, don't take that away from me, don't mess with it. People without insurance or people who have very limited insurance, they're maybe more willing to kind of go with something new. And so the question is, how do policymakers figure out in a very complex area of the economy what you could do to really make it efficient so that we're spending something closer to what other countries do and have, the better outcomes they have? How do you do that without basically freaking people out? Because it's just really easy to scare them. And I've seen this in the legislature, even in kind of little areas we try to look at. It's like, the business people really put this on the agenda because they got organized and they came and they said these hospitals in particular are just raking in the dough. They have huge reserves, and it's like killing us out here trying to insure our employees. So you guys got to do something about it. And so the legislature got very revved up about that. And there were some pretty strong things they were going to do in the beginning of the session, and they revved up and it go. But as the session went along, that fear factor kicked in. It was easy for them to go out that were opposing what was being proposed and say, like, hey, bad things are going to happen. You're not going to get the care you need. You're going to wait too long. Your rural hospital is going to go under, whatever the thing was. And the legislature got a little spooked, and they kind of backed off and did, some important things, but fairly timid things compared to what was being discussed in the beginning. So that's the real issue with healthcare. And again, because these companies we're dealing with in the healthcare space, oftentimes they're national companies, insurance companies and such. Maybe Congress has to be the one to try to get a handle on this, but I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for that to happen.
Before I pass to Dave, one of the other things that I've noticed, and I've been asking my healthcare providers, and I don't know if we have any healthcare providers in here, optometrists, dentists, whatever, they don't take Medicaid. They will not take Medicaid patients because one is the reimbursement rate, but that isn't even it. Most of the medical professionals kind of dedicate anticipate doing pro bono work. It's the length of time it takes to get that under market rate reimbursement. Used to be 4 months, now it's 18 months. So they just don't want to deal with that, or they book that spot for a Medicaid patient who doesn't call, doesn't show up, they have a cancellation where they could have filled that spot with a private pay. So our providers are not wanting to take Medicaid patients.
I don't have a lot more to add, but Representative Pierce, when he mentioned, treating the symptom, was it last year, maybe the year before, it was a Senate bill that came over, and it would help health departments with funding to kind of change, before there's a sickness that you have to treat, like it was like a pound of prevention or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think while we address these like on the back end, we also have to continue. You can't just do that one time and then expect that to fix, these problems. So I think we have to continue to think, like, how do we fund our health departments better? Because when you look at how we rank against other states, it's just not great. And if we can get that funding back up, I think you'll see that maybe long-term shift. But it is going to be painful because if you're making a budget in any situation, whether it's your house or the county or the state, your needs, sometimes they outweigh how much money you have, and you have to make tough cuts. And I think this is just going to be this is only my second, budget year, but the first year I heard things are tight, which they didn't seem to be because there was a lot of funding for a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have, signed. There's a $100 million Potato Creek State Lodge. I don't even know where that's at, but that was in the budget. And this year it's like, things are going to be tight. And I had bills that I thought were good, and I thought, well, I'm going to, like the gate fee, I had a bill that would be a payment in lieu of taxes. And, when you find out how tight things are, like they're going to have to say no to a lot of good stuff this year. And so I think there's going to be people that just don't make that cut. And K through 12 and Medicaid are going to be two of the biggest budget items. And it's heartbreaking when you have people come to the State House and they're there, advocating for their needs, and they're medically compromised in some way. And it's tough to, see that and hear those stories, but you only have so much money to spend. So I'm glad I'm not on the Public Health Committee to make those decisions in the committee.
All right, thank you. We got lots of really good questions coming in, so keep those coming. I want to get to a question on transit here. We've got a fantastic transit system that serves a lot of our students in Monroe County, a lot of our workers, businesses, and residents. Transit systems across the state have had costs increase over 54% during the past 11 years, while at the same time, the state public mass transit fund has remained flatlined. Would you support a reasonable inflationary increase in the public mass transit fund for urban and rural transit providers? And maybe that's just a yes or no.
Well, it's an I don't know, because when you were looking at Indigo is what makes the headlines, and Indigo is forming people's opinion on mass transit, good or bad. And right now it's pretty bad. So it would be very difficult to say, even if a community has a good program, it's always going to be compared to, look at what Indigo has done with their money. And whether you're doing it right or not, that's your standard. So I don't know that increasing that fund would go over well.
Well, I think an increase is definitely deserved, and of course you've got to look at it in all these competing priorities. But one thing to understand is there was a time when the transit systems got a set percentage of the state sales tax. It was like 0.00 something, but they had, if the sales tax grew, they would get that additional amount. And then I think it was Senator Kenley probably more than a decade ago, at some point decided that no, there shouldn't be an automatic kind of pass through that. They should have to come and fight for their appropriation like everyone else. And so they took away the percentage of the sales tax. They made, I guess, some flat amount that kind of approximated what they're getting at the time. And then it's been flatlined ever since. And look at how much just in the last few years inflation has raged, and you got fuel costs and all kinds of other issues. And so I think that we've kind of ignored transit by flatlining it for so long. And now we're in a year where we're just talking about how we're going to get education funded, how we're going to do the healthcare stuff. And now they've got to get in line with everyone else to try to fight for what they want. But they've been waiting a long time to get some kind of increase that even, just makes up for the lost ground from all the inflation and additional costs that they have.
I'm not real passionate about this issue and haven't learned enough about it, so I'm going to give you my political answer that I would just have to hear more before I could make a decision.
Fair enough. Sure.
So I think one of the issues on that, if you think about it, it's urban areas that have the transit systems, right? And we have, I think, probably a majority of legislators that are really from more rural areas. They might have a little piece of an urban area. They might come in and get a little chunk of Indianapolis. And so for that reason, it's not as big of a priority for a lot of legislators because they just don't have those services in their communities. And so if you're fighting for priorities in the budget, transit might be a priority for people from places like, Bloomington, Indianapolis, South Bend. But a lot of those other rural counties, it's just not a priority because they don't have the service.
Got it. Okay, next question. Large portions of Indiana are facing an aging population and stagnating working age population. Is this on the legislature's radar? Are there proposals related to talent attraction and retention, i.e. jobs, wages, housing, quality of life, etc.? So large portions of Indiana are facing an aging population and stagnating working age population. Is this on the legislator's radar to be able to, I think, attract more working age individuals and families to come to Indiana?
I think so. Our state in the Midwest, I think we've still continued to be one of the fastest growing here, and people are moving into our state for the tax environment, the low cost of living. And the housing has been an issue, and that House Bill 1005 that I mentioned earlier is there to try and bridge that the gap between like bare land and where you can actually develop on it. And I can't remember the numbers now exactly, but the Habitat for Humanity had that project, and they did like a portion of it, and I think the infrastructure cost before they built the first house was $50,000 for the the sewer and the water and the streets and the curbs and sidewalks, and then it was like 2 years later, that $50,000 cost had gone up to $80,000 per lot. And it's tough to build new homes when the costs are rising that quickly. And we're Monroe County for sure has got some of the highest housing costs in the state, and we need to do things to kind of offset that to get younger working families to live here. And this this hits me in Brown County as well. The population there is mostly people that have come to Brown County to visit. They fall in love with Brown County, and then they say, I want to retire there someday. So they retire there. Well, they don't have kids in the school system. So the school system, there's no jobs in Brown County. The people that live there typically move out and for work each day. So it's difficult to get the school system population has suffered from probably the late 90s to today, and if we don't have more affordable housing, and a lot of that has to do with like lot sizes, sewer infrastructure, and if we could expand some of that, I think that would help help our growth in areas where it needs to be. And for me, that needs to be in Brown County and Monroe County. So I don't have a lot. I don't remember what the rest of the question was, but the housing, for me, if we had more housing, I think we could continue to get those people that are working and living and growing families. And maybe that's senior housing where folks can move out of a house that may be more than they need into a smaller house. So I think we just need basically an entire range of houses for any demographic.
Over the last decade, Indiana has been on the top, 1, 2 on tax environment, best place to start a business, et cetera. We're always in the top 10. But I just learned about this one think tank who did a study who found out we're about 40th on the uptake of these programs. So we're great. We're having trouble getting people to take advantage of that. At the same time, they're saying that the ones who do take advantage of it are very happy. So there's that disconnect. We have if you build it, they will come. We've built it. We need them to come. And the people who have come are happy. Where is the disconnect? And so I think that is the next step in some of our studies with the state.
Yeah, I think the problem that Indiana has is it's all about workforce, and particularly if you're trying to build an economy, as we're trying to do in Bloomington, high-tech economy, entrepreneurship economy, that kind of thing, you have to have a good quality of life. And we have some disadvantages. One, because people on the coast think we're flyover country. Two, we don't have giant, majestic mountains to look at. We don't have lovely ocean beaches. Lake Michigan's pretty good, but it's a little sliver up there. We don't have a lot of the things that might cause, like a Colorado or someplace like that might cause people to say, like, this would be a really great place to live. And so we have to fight through that to get people to come here, because the problem is we're graduating students from college and they're all leaving. Right? So we have, if you look at our overall population, we have a pretty low percentage of people with college degrees. And if you think college degrees are important for high-tech industries, we got a problem. So the question is, what can you do? Now, some things have been done where I think the READY grants, a lot of those over the years have been used to try to do quality of life amenity things like trails, things like that, to try to show people like, hey, you can come here and it's a lower cost of living and you can have amenities and you can raise your kids here in a good environment. I mean, there's some good things happening here. But I can recall being at a big pharmaceutical company up in Indy, and a woman was talking to us that had moved there from Boston, and she talked about the fact of sitting down with her family and saying, like, I have an opportunity to move up the ladder here, get a little more income, but we have to move to Indianapolis. And their family practically in tears because they had no, to them, Indiana was this vast, cultureless land of corn. And that was it. And she said, when we kind of got here, we're like, wow, and it was Indianapolis, like, they actually have stuff here. They have museums. They have art. There's actually some culture here, They've got things happening, right? And so I think that what we have to do is we have to, particularly to get younger people to stay here and to come here, is we have to really be seen as more of a forward-thinking state than perhaps we are. And one example of this sticks with me is back in the Pence administration. You might remember we had the huge blow-up over the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was received as kind of an attack on the LGBTQ community and was repealed or modified within a couple days. But that made global headlines. There were jokes about it on Saturday Night Live and stuff. And I have a friend who's a German. He used to work for the Bundestag and met him on a staff exchange when I worked for Congress. And he sent me an email and he said, like, hey, Indiana's in the news over here about attacking gays, right? And he said, that seems a little retro. And so the thing is, if that's kind of the image that goes out, about the state, I think it makes it less likely that younger people will feel like it's the place they want to come to. So I think we have to work on our image a little bit more and make people aware of what's available here.
Very good, thank you. And here it is, it came in from my friend on the city council. Can Representative Hall please elaborate on his annexation bill and reflect on it through the lens of economic growth?
So I represent kind of Representative Pierce gets more of the core of Bloomington. I kind of get the outer crust. And when I was door knocking, people were, when we're talking about property taxes and, cost of living and their medical costs, some were really nervous and desperate about the amount of that the property taxes would go up if the annexation, succeeded. And it was heartbreaking to hear from them because they're making ends meet, but the costs have gone up, and then this would be another large increase for them on a fixed income. So I'm not anti-annexation. I would like to see, rather than the city be able to draw their map and say we're going to annex this area, and then they win by default after holding their meetings, and if the people don't act, the annexation goes through and it's done. So it forces people that are trying to work and live and survive to have to go out and mobilize and gather signatures and raise money and hire attorneys. And when the city has I think it's been over $2.4 million that they've spent on the annexation, and you've got these people that were just minding their own business that had to, gather together and try and raise money to fight this, and I think they've spent over $250,000 to fight it. And it just keeps getting appealed, and it just keeps moving, and it's like you've got this David and Goliath scenario. I wouldn't do away with annexation. It would just be if there was a burden to be carried by one group or the other, it should be the city that's starting the annexation. If they want to annex these areas, they still get to draw their map, but then it's on them to go out and gather 65% of the signatures of the people in that annexation area, explain to them why it's a good idea for them to be annexed, what they're going to get out of it, and then they do the work of gathering those signatures. And if the city meets that 65% requirement, then there's no remonstrance, there's no court costs, the attorneys aren't making a bunch of money, the annexation moves forward. So it's pretty simple, and if a city wants to extend sewer service, they can still go out. It wouldn't be a remonstrance waiver because there would be no remonstrance process. So I'm not sure what word our legal services agency is going to make up, but it would be like a pre-acceptance to annexation that the city could say, if we're going to extend our sewer out here, you need to go ahead and sign when we annex, or if we annex in the next 15 years, you've already said yes by signing this agreement. So then they could still extend that service and be able to annex that area in the future. But that's pretty much the bill. I had more in it. I took it out because I wanted to focus. It had taxation. It had a lot of other things. And I know Representative Pierce will probably be up front on the other microphone picking my bill apart if it hits the floor. So I wanted to make sure it was narrowly focused on just where that burden lies when there's an annexation proposed. But I would answer follow-up questions if anybody's got them, if that's okay with Aaron.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful. We look forward to following the bill through the 2025 session. One other question for Representative Mayfield on a bill that you had mentioned earlier regarding the Monroe County food and beverage tax. Obviously, we're in the midst of a convention center expansion project that the community is very supportive of. Can you share some insight? Would that bill take away any funding from Bloomington that would allow construction of the expanded convention center?
Thanks, Eric. So if you go a little bit of the history on that food and beverage tax, the enabling legislation was passed in 2009, that you could have up to a 1% food and beverage tax within Monroe County. It didn't pass the county council, the local government, until 2015. I think anyone on?
2016.
16? Okay, so it took a while. It was stagnant. Economy, even down here, the economy it wasn't ripe to implement a new tax. Then in 2016, you started collecting the tax, and until very recently, you've got about $20 million in that fund, and it had not been spent at all. So the last budget cycle, the legislature said basically, fish or cut bait. If you don't spend that money, we're going to take it away and you're going to rescind the tax. Because all you're doing is collecting the tax, and there was no project. It was collecting the tax for the sake of collecting the tax. I mean, it was not being utilized. So we pushed the local government to actually move on it. And before it got too far down the line, in 2009, Ellettsville was still just a little burg off of I-69. It has been the largest growth area in the county. And when you think about the food and beverage establishments throughout Monroe County, you're concentrated in the city of Bloomington, or you're in Ellettsville, or you're the Porthole Inn, or a smattering of others that are actually out in the county in an unincorporated area. The original bill only said that there are two entities, City of Bloomington and Monroe County. So the money that was collected within the municipal boundaries of Bloomington stayed in Bloomington for their project. The money collected in the county outside of Bloomington went to the county, and they could use it for their project. Well, now Ellettsville has grown and has the second largest number of eating establishments. So two things here is there has been a transit issue that has arisen in the last couple of years between Bloomington and Ellettsville, and I know there are two proposals, and this is why the bill is not in its final form, because I still need to understand the better details of there were two proposals and how much those cost and so forth. of companies who would go between Bloomington and Ellettsville for ridership. Ellettsville does not have a mechanism to raise revenue to fund that. And so they will have to terminate that line. This would give them that opportunity, and it does collect enough to cover the transit costs currently. Actually, the collections exceed the cost of one of the proposals. So my idea, as I continue to work with the different stakeholders, is dedicate some of that money to cover the transit costs so that line can continue between Bloomington and Ellettsville. And then the question becomes what to do with the excess. How much does Ellettsville get to keep for other tourism or economic development? How much goes to should there be a portion of it that goes to the county, because they were sort of anticipating that for their own project as well. Still working through that, but that is the gist of it. We're trying to, the main goal of that bill is to address the transit problem. What to do with the rest of the money is still being worked out.
Got it. Thank you, and that's very helpful. And so it sounds like it would not impact any of Bloomington's funding.
No, and we wanted to also get the bill passed, or the discussion had, before those funds are committed to a specific project.
Yep. Got it. Okay, well, we are at the time now where we're going to have the legislators ask the audience questions. Now that you've heard from them on some issues that are important to you, they want to get your feedback on issues of importance that'll be addressed by the General Assembly, and here's how it works. So you've all got the red and green cards. We've asked our legislators to come prepared with a few questions for audience members. Using the red and green cards before you, you can signify in broad terms your support or opposition for the issue in question. I'll ask you to pick up the red and green laminated cards. Green thumbs up side signals your support, and the red thumbs down side signals your disapproval. So again, we're going to start with Representative Mayfield's question and then proceed through the panel. We should have time for hopefully a couple rounds here of this.
A lightning round.
A lightning round, yes.
Should the death penalty in Indiana be repealed?
Oh, kind of mixed. Yeah. Yes. All right. Good question. Mr. Pierce.
All right, got to ask an oldie but a goodie. Should Indiana finally legalize marijuana?
Again, a little mixed, but I think we're probably seeing more green, no pun intended, than red. Okay. Mr. Hall.
Okay, so you heard my idea on the annexation bill. Green, if you think that it should remain where the burden is put on the people to remonstrate, or red if it should be the city that goes out and gathers those signatures. Oh, dang. Did you see that? Rep
Oh,
Pierce?
wow. A lot of red there.
I'm sort of going to repeat Representative Pierce's question, but I have a three-part. So every time I say an option, raise your card. So should cannabis remain illegal in all cases in Indiana? Should it be legalized for medicinal purposes only? And then should it be legalized for just across the board? Whoa.
Wow. Okay, very interesting. I would say that was 50-50 on that last one there. Yeah, yeah. A lot more support for medicinal marijuana, for sure. Another question, Mr. Pierce?
Yeah, you know, on the annexation thing, I should probably mention that, you know, my district does not go outside the city limits. Everybody I represent is already paying those city taxes, so they might have a slightly different viewpoint. All right, this is something from the governor's agenda and his big packet of ideas I was going to ask you about. Well, let me just tell you what his proposal is. To institute a sales tax holiday 3 times a year, once for school supplies, again for outdoor recreation, I guess in the spring or something, and then also for youth sports equipment. So we would have 3 state tax holidays. So do you support instituting 3 state sales tax holidays for those purposes?
Probably more no's than yeses, but quite a few yeses out there. Go ahead, Ms. Mayfield.
Okay, I sit on public policy, and Indiana has, gaming, table games, slots, and so forth. The big push now is to go with fully casino on your phone. They call it iGaming. Should iGaming be legal in Indiana? Whew.
Wow. Mostly no. Mostly no. But some yeses.
So I've got another bill idea, and this does not mean that it's going to go or not go, but I got a question to see how this crowd likes it. I've not heard of this anywhere else. Monroe County has a 25-year moratorium. If you subdivide your property, that you can't subdivide it for another 25 years. If I had a bill that said that it would do away with the 25-year moratorium, would you be in favor of that or not? Okay,
Universally, yes.
I may have another bill to file.
All right. Well, it looks like that's all that we have for the legend. Now, I've got a question for the audience. Should we expand the Monroe Convention Center with food and beverage tax funds? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's good, because we are in the process right now of collecting signatures for a petition for the bond documents to do this. So this project is happening. We're all very excited about it. It's been a huge goal for the Chamber of Commerce for many, many years. Sitting outside at the registration table, we're going to have Jim Whitlatch, the Capital Improvement Board's attorney, and Jessica McClellan, the city controller, who will have a petition page there. It takes 5 seconds to put your name on it. If you're a landowner in the city of Bloomington, please help the chamber. Go out there, help the community. Go out there and put your name on that petition so that we can present that as part of the legal package that we need to do for the Convention Center expansion. At this time, I want to thank you all again for coming here and supporting this program. Thanks to all of our legislators for taking time to share their insights today. As we close, I want to direct everybody to our 2025 legislative and local policy agendas. It's found on your tables there and also on our website. These are posted online at chamberbloomington.org under the Advocacy tab, and a digital version can also be found on the Chamber's app, which you can download with the QR codes on your program. The Chamber looks forward to a very busy 2025 advocating on behalf of all of you, our members. Once again, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, Indiana University, IU Credit Union, Old National Bank, the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation, Duke Energy, Fourth Phase Technology, Hoosier Energy, and Smithville for supporting this event. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Thank you all for attending this event. We are adjourned.